So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Remote Work Wednesday for April. Can't believe it's April. On behalf of the Remote Online Initiative and the K-State Research and Extension Community Vitality Team, we're certainly glad to have everyone with us. I'm Ron Wilson, Director of the Huck Boyd Institute for Rural Development at K-State. Big thanks to Deborah Cole, who's our State Program Leader Coordinator for KSRE Community Vitality. Deb Oldie from the North Central Regional Planning Commission has also been our partner on this project. This is a project of the Remote Online Initiative, and I would refer you to the website www.kansasremotework.com, which has info about the opportunity to take month-long online classes that can certify participants as remote workers or leaders of remote and hybrid teams. So we'd encourage you to check that out. We do Remote Work Wednesdays on the first Wednesday of each month, just simply to address the opportunities and challenges relating to remote work. And we have a terrific speaker today. As we think about remote work versus on-site employment and activity, what are the mental health implications of being removed from that work site and that work team in a physical sense? So our good friend and colleague, Dr. Elaine Johannes, is going to address these issues: stress and mental wellness, thriving as a remote worker. Dr. Johannes is the Kansas Health Foundation Distinguished Professor in Community Health for K-State Research and Extension, State Extension Specialist in the Department of Applied Human Sciences and the College of Health and Human Sciences here at K-State. Dr. Johannes has degrees from K-State in psychology, a master's in adult and community counseling, graduate certificate in gerontology, and a doctorate in lifespan human development. She has so many activities and awards that are too numerous to mention. But I have to say that just last year, she was the recipient of the Samuel J. Crumbine Medal from the Kansas Public Health Association. She was selected by the National Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities Board of Health and Human Sciences for the National Outstanding Engagement Award and received the National Institute of Food and Ag from USDA Cooperative Extension and APLU North Central Region Excellence in Extension Award. So Elaine has a whole lot of honors to her credit and a huge commitment to the health and wellness of the people of Kansas. So anyway, Elaine, we'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Ron. Oh my word, that's embarrassing. When you hear it. So sure, good to see you all. And I recognize many of the names and the faces, but I'm making new friends today. I'm making connections. Pam, I think you and I have met before. I can't remember where though. And Allison, I'm glad that you're on today. And Casera, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is it Casera or Casera? And then also we have Carolyn now. So thank you all. I think it's important that I say a little bit about connection before we start. I could spend a whole hour talking about this and we could have lunch and then we could move along our day, but that doesn't help our connection, meaning relational connection. And so I want you to interrupt me. I want us not to get through the slides, honestly. If that becomes what happens, it happens. But I do think for the discussion of remote work or telework, we'll talk about the differences of those. I think it's important that we make connection because that's what our mental health is based on. I'm not an expert in this particular part of our mental wellness, but I've lived this. I think all of us have since the pandemic and maybe even before. And maybe you are not maybe having undue stress or some mental health concerns yourself, but if you are, then join the group. But if you have a colleague, a coworker, a partner, a loved one, a child that you think is having a tough go because of this transition we've all been through, and some will call it a trauma we've all been through, then feel free to maybe mention it today if you feel comfortable. I want to remind us we are recording. So if you prefer not to share, then that's fine. But at the end of the slides, you'll see my contact information, and I would be glad to be of a referral or resource for you. Again, I'm not a clinician. Let me just say that. Even though I have some of those degrees that could move me into clinical work, I did not do that. So I'm not a licensed therapist, but I know some real good ones. So, and I also know them all over the state. So that's a good thing too, because there aren't enough hands on deck. Um, so I appreciate Ron and the whole team of the remote work program inviting me to share my thoughts. And so I'll be watching with Ron on the chat. And if we need to back up, we will, or if we need to speed up, we will too. If at any time we have internet problems, we persevere, right? We continue to work forward. Um, just want to ask, can you still now see this slide? The difference between telework and remote work. Okay. I think it's really important that we delineate, that we separate, that we make clear there are differences between those of us who work behind a computer screen and those who live behind a computer screen at a choice. And that's really what the remote work definition really is. According to Velocity Global, which is an international remote work firm that's done a lot of studying, remote work is, boy, you could live anywhere. You could work anywhere as long as you've got that internet going and electricity. And you only really plan to attend meetings virtually. You really never plan to meet the colleagues who you interact with in real time, in face to face. And communication is often asynchronous, meaning that you really don't have to be online at a particular date or time across the whole globe. And you get your work done and it's just fine. When we think about telework, and let me ask you to look at that green column there, telework, or what could be called as a hybrid. You come and go, you have an office that you're kind of anchored or tethered to. There are colleagues who you know, and maybe you know where they work. You've been in their office, they know where you work. That's where you live in a similar area to your employer. You can get there if you need to. You do attend occasionally in-person meetings, and communication is like in real time, like what we're doing today. We're together. We, believe it or not, I think we're on Central Time. Some of you may be on Mountain. Who's to say? But so that's a difference, and I think it's an important difference because sometimes we find ourselves in the right place at the right time, happier than a clam, right? Those that are more of an introvert, meaning you don't really have your bucket filled by being around a lot of folks, and nor do you seek that out. Maybe remote work is just your cup of tea. Historically, there have been a lot of people doing remote work. Think about the agricultural producer. Think about the person who works in fishing or who services the military far away in these remote Arctic labs. You know, sometimes remote work is just what you plan to do. When we think about astronauts, maybe they're doing remote work, but it's fine. But on the other hand, we're seeing an increase in telework and those that have this blend. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today is this blend. Should I consider telework or remote work? Well, maybe in telework, you want to have relationships. You want to know your colleagues and you want to live around your employer. But in remote work, you're pretty independent. You are away from people who are in your industry or in your office. You're away and you can live anywhere you want. Kaylee, I'm glad that you posted on the chat. I think a lot of people use these terms loosely. Sometimes we kind of mix them. But yeah, you're right. I too appreciate making clear because both of these different kinds of work have different kinds of mental health response. So let's get into it. Is that all right? Okay. There's been a lot of study, really, even prior to the pandemic, about mental health in the workplace. Most of the studies have been done by either government offices, CDC, OSHA, or by health insurance firms. Lyra is one, or by these large global employers. And you'll see some data. We're going to take a walk through data for a bit. That kind of sets a level playing field about our discussion. So Lyra has been doing these state of the workforce mental health reports for about 10 years now. We have ebbs and flows. They kind of suspended a couple of the years between the pandemic. It was hard to get responses, but they came back in 2023 and produced their most recent report. And I gave you the citation there in case you want to read it. There's really serious mental health issues that are on the rise in the workplace. Now, Lyra, given the fact that they're a global insurance company for health and they employ lots of people, they went globally. So the data you're seeing here is comprised of 250 HR or benefit specialists, their response, and that 250 had to and have to work in a company of 1,000 employees or more. So quite a few. The data also include more than 1,900 US employees who also work with more than a group of 1,000 employees, co-workers. And then in addition, Lyra in this year's study went global. And so there's 1,552 global employees who are responding to questions about their mental and physical well-being. And you can look at some comparison between 2022 and 2023. These are adults, by the way, over the age of 18. Ideas of self-harm, meaning self-injury, ideas of suicide, having suicidal thoughts, involved with intimate partner violence, and inpatient hospital stays based upon mental health diagnosis or crisis are up. And they are not up insignificantly. It is something to pay attention to. And so Lyra actually has reported on this and shared some of the data. Some of the key findings of that report is that people are facing post-pandemic serious mental health issues. You know, we probably weren't at our 110% before the pandemic. Maybe we understand that. There was maybe some stress going on at the workplace, but it's more than just burnout and stress now. We're seeing some diagnosable mental health conditions. The second thing is that work is a top social determinant of mental health. The respondents used to, maybe a year back in 22, were saying that, you know, it was mostly the economy, mostly our lack of a raise, and maybe even the physical setting of the workplace. But now a top determinant of how effective we are and productive we are in the workplace is our mental health. Over half of US workers are also supporting children with mental health conditions or challenges or crisis. So think about, maybe you yourself have noticed this, that when the pandemic was at full force and many of the schools were closed, or maybe they had a mixed schedule, children were at home and some of those mental health issues became obvious. So more than half of US workers are also not only dealing with their own issues around work and around thriving and wellness, but also they're helping their child maintain and thrive too. Another concern, access to care, though it's improving, finding whether it's effective. And yes, there's more tele mental health. There's more telecounseling. We're seeing more and more commercials about it. That I think as a society, we're talking more openly, like today, about our mental health and how well we're doing. But does that mean we're getting the right care in the right way to meet my needs? There are cultural differences, there are language differences. Somebody from New York City may not understand living in Hayes, America. So again, is it improving even though it's accessible? And then this last one, employers and employees have divergent perspectives about what is needed to be a productive workforce in the way of mental health. Maybe the retreats that we all used to have to create team, you take a retreat and you go out and you tackle the hill and you start to, mottos and have a similar chant. That's not going to cut it anymore. And employers, I think, are aware of that. And you'll see another data slide coming up here that employers are worried about the pressure that's on their employees' mental health, and the managers themselves feel pressure that they need to respond. There are other data sets, other information that's 2023 that actually does lead us to believe that there's some mental health issues going on, especially if you have a work setting that maybe isn't a good fit. Fully remote remote workers and hybrid workers, you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen there, that indicates an increased level of anxiety and depression as compared to the person that's working in the office, 35%. Then over here on your right-hand side, executives, what are they saying? 64% of executives said that remote work is negatively affecting their employees' mental health. And that's up from 2021, which was just at the beginning of the pandemic. So executives are saying that workers are feeling more isolated. 73% of executives that were surveyed by a Chamber of Commerce survey are saying workers are more isolated, and that's an increase from 2021. So what's the message here? Okay, I'm going to push through because then I'm going to have us have a discussion. Let me back up a bit. If we don't have enough worry yet, there was in 2023 what was called a meta-analysis of 65 studies, reputable studies done in the United States about the mental health of remote workers. And they use the word remote, but then as you read the study, they really mean that telework, the person who's tethered to an office, but then they're working at home, but they're back and forth. The results indicate that teleworkers' behavior, regardless of their positions, if they're teaching, if they're doing administration, if they're hospital staff or psychologists, there's an increase in pathology, especially among women. Now, we can't leave that as the story, because guess what? As doom and gloom as some of these studies and some of this reporting is, guess what? There are areas of well-being, and there are enough reputable companies that are doing their own analysis and sharing it across the globe, Cisco being one. They also are a big international firm. Cisco does a worksite wellness survey. They've been doing it for 10 years, a little bit more. And guess what? This is what was their results back in 2023, that there are 5 areas of well-being. If you are a teleworker or even remote, the respondents, 76% said they saved money by doing the telework. 68% said they had better health physically. You can get up and get active. They're social. Their social improvement of family relationships was 74%. And you said our family is better off. Emotionally, workers had 82% of workers had the ability to work in a telehealth, or pardon me, in a telework or a hybrid model, and they were happier. They're more motivated. And then 55% said that they had less stress. Now, what in the heck? We just walked through some of that really difficult but real, difficult but real information. And then now we continue looking at maybe it's not so bad. Maybe remote work is just what we want if it's your cup of tea. And maybe this movement of telework, the hybrid, is invigorating. And it allows that worker, ourselves, to have control and choice. Here's some other reputable data, fairly recent. Full-time in-office workers felt least satisfied with their balance of work life, as well as they were much less satisfied than the hybrid worker or the remote worker who was felt most satisfied with their workplace. And over here on the right-hand side, 71% of respondents said, as compared to in-office workforce, improved life balance. They have reported less burnout. It was the in-office worker who had more burnout, less engagement compared to the other kinds of remote work environments or telework that we talked about. So what is the difference? I'm going to slow down here pretty soon. So what's the difference? Well, according to a researcher and an author and somebody who's been on a lot of these talk shows recently in these last 3 years about remote work, Dr. Klopisi says the difference is control. If we as workers have control over our environments and over the pace of our work and over our position as far as how do we interact with our colleagues or how do we choose not to, then control is part of our mental health. If we're given choice, the choice of when do I go in for a job, when do I go in to see my colleagues, when do I schedule a Zoom, when do I get things done, and how does that balance with my life? If we're able to set boundaries and expectations with our family, with ourselves, with our employer, our mental health is better. And boy, if we could take physical and mental health breaks throughout the day, we're better. And if we know ourselves, meaning that we aren't inadvertently in a remote work environment where we see really no one who knows our work, we really don't interact with any of our colleagues, that may be really stressful for an extrovert. And some of you may be extroverts today, and I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about that. But as an introvert, maybe this is great. You've been waiting for this opportunity to work on the top of a hill and not really interact with people who take up your time in chit chat throughout the day. Maybe that's okay. But that last one I think is important. The difference is that remote work, and I would say maybe telework, that mixture of home and work, can strengthen our relationships with family and friends. It can strengthen even bonds with the office staff that we don't have to see every day because we have better relationships. We know how to manage that maybe a bit more. And so there is some positive. But let's take a little stop now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'd like to hear if anyone here would like to share. Do you consider yourself a remote worker, a teleworker? And do any of these positive attributes for either of that resonate for you? You found that, yeah, it's pretty good. And maybe your mental health is improved because of your flexibility in that environment. Does anybody want to take time to share? Yeah,
I'll
Karen.
say,
Yeah.
yeah. I'll say, sorry, my printer's going crazy at the same time. I'll say I think I'm in more of a telework situation, rather than remote, truly remote. But I'm far enough away from office workers that I don't see them on a regular, quarterly is about it.
Mhm.
And as a extrovert, that's tough for me. And so I try my hardest to figure out how to alleviate those, I don't know,
Yeah.
negative thoughts in my heads of
Yeah.
that. It's, yeah.
So Carolyn, thank you. Thank you for sharing and then delineating for us, illustrating really well that you're working in a telework environment where you know where your colleagues are and you can go see them, and occasionally you probably need to fill your bucket and to feel like you're connected. Um, thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that you're working on it. Boy, this is all new to all of us. Uh, it's probably going to take a whole generation plus then some more for us to figure out this new kind of work style. And y'all have been studying that as you've been part of the remote work Wednesday discussions. Um, thank you, Carolyn. Anyone else would like to share your work environment and do any of these attributes of this is a positive choice speak to you?
Elaine, this is Ron. I
Yeah.
am so impressed with the data that you have pulled together. Um, Extremely insightful. And that last point that uh, that remote work can strengthen ties with family and friends, but in-person work can strengthen the bond with coworkers and supervisors potentially, because that's one thing we hear. um, if I'm a remote worker, yeah, I'm happy, I'm saving money, I kind of, prefer the flexibility. But if I'm out of sight, out of mind, what about career advancement? What about, I mean, there's pros and cons to office politics. How do I build a relationship with coworkers if there are job cuts?
Yeah.
Who's going to be more at risk? The person who's there every day to day at the side of the supervisor, the boss, or the person who's removed? So
Mhm.
very, very insightful. I actually am working more telework, more remotely in on campus and off. And I like the flexibility. I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about choice and options.
Yeah. Well, and Ron, I appreciate you saying what I'm experiencing. The more flexibility I have, the better. But you and I are both well established in our career. You're absolutely right. If you're a young person, new career path, and you don't have that opportunity to interact with your manager, with your supervisor very often, and then you come up with performance issues or a question, and that creates more anxiety, and that anxiety makes us feel more isolated and depressed. It's a slippery slope.
And the synergy of the what we used to call the office water cooler, the person you run into at the hall in the hallway and can bounce ideas off spontaneously. Sometimes that's a really productive
Mhm.
opportunity too.
Mhm.
I know in our remote work classes, that's one of the elements that's covered is, how to continue to build a relationship, how to work on that and not become so isolated that you lost the connection altogether.
Yeah, yeah. And doesn't it go back to one of the indicators was know what works for you? Know whether remote work is, like I said, your cup of tea. You don't mind being alone because you're an introvert by nature and it doesn't bother. But if people are more extroverted and really get replenishment by being around others, then it can be harmful. It really can. And you have a person that doesn't really have an understanding of what their preference is yet. They haven't really taken time to understand their cadence, their workflow, their own ways of being connected. And if an employer says, no, this is the mandate, this is how you're going to perform, you have no control, you have no choice. And then you start to wonder, well, is this really, am I in relationship anymore? Am I even necessary? Am I a contributor? Am I worthwhile? And that thinking then can create anxiety. Yeah. Well, I appreciate some reflection. Now, let's move into not only individual well-being and mental health around these different kinds of work environment, but let's talk about community. Let's talk about what we've seen from the Surgeon General's report. So it was in 2023. Oh, by the way, can you guys see my slides?
We can see the slide plus your next one. So
Okay, so you could still see that. Well, let's just keep on going. You guys get the full meal deal. Let's just keep on going. Good. So you get to see there's a little bit more data. So in 2023, Surgeon General Murphy released really a cutting edge report on our pandemic of loneliness and isolation. If you've not seen it yet, you'll see the reference coming up here pretty soon, but it does give us kind of a take step back about how loneliness, that emotion, that feeling, it's not being alone. By the way, being alone is sometimes so replenishing, so great. Loneliness is different. Loneliness is a feeling, an emotion that we are isolated, we are at risk, we have no support, and we can become anxious about that. And anxiety is one of the most pressing mental health issues in the United States for not only adults, but for kids too. So we're going to take a walk through some of this report and talk a little bit more about what does it mean to be connected socially. And sometimes we find our social connection is our workplace. I mean, sometimes that does work. For the remote worker, 100% remote worker, that maybe is not relevant. Maybe your connection to social connection isn't that important. But I thought you might want to see some trends that predate the pandemic. Because a lot of the studies I shared with you came during the pandemic and afterwards. But I want to take a little step before. So the US Census started to track adults who live alone. And we're on the rise. A lot of adults, and part of it is due to the fact that we're an aging society and widows and widowers are, living alone. However, younger people, younger meaning in their 20s, are living alone. And you'll see this really stunning graph here. The millions of households since 1960 to 2020 have really increased of living alone. And there's a little icon in the bottom here of your screen, the lower right-hand side. This is information from the Civic Health Index in the United States. There is such a thing called civic health. And civic health, which we're going to take a little glance at here pretty soon, has a lot of bearing on our physical and mental health. The more civically we are engaged, the more we happen to join clubs or be involved with efforts or groups, the more access we have to information in our community, and the more we feel a place of belonging, civic health is improved. That's called civic health. Okay, let's continue on a little bit. So in the Surgeon General's report, it talks a little bit about loneliness and isolation and what are the factors that can shape our civic or social connection. Well, yeah, there's individual factors that get us more engaged or not, that lead to us feeling less lonely or more. Some of the individual factors are our gender, our personality, our life stage, older adults. Socioeconomic status, you'll see up there at the top, you know, if you're on a very fixed income or no income, how do you get to a place to engage with friends or pay for broadband, you know? And then our own mental health. People that have been struggling with mental health concerns anyway, and then they find themselves in a remote work environment or even a telework that can amplify some of those mental health anxieties, some of that depression, some of that feeling unsure. Our relationships also are a factor with how much we're connected. The structure and the function of those relationships. Do we have a partner we share a house with, a residence with? What's the size of our household? Are we relying on one or two or a whole herd of people in the house, or the people that we know who each other are? There are such things called weak ties. Early on, some of the economists did studies about weak ties are as good as those strong ties to get ahead in industry, to get ahead in business. Well, having weak ties, meaning that person you see at the coffee shop every week, or the grocery store clerk you see every Sunday afternoon where you get your dry goods. Those weak ties actually create relationships over time that strengthen our social connection and our mental health. Well, the lower part of this chart then talks about community. Okay, how does a community space lead us to be more socially connected? Are there places for people to meet? Are there parks? Are there libraries that have open spaces where you could sit and meet and plan or discuss things? What about access to healthcare? Are there community organizations you trust? The mom and shop pops that Ron Wilson always elevates and shows as examples of rural resilience. Those are contributors to social health and civic health. And then society as a whole. Are there policies? Are there ways that we can be more connected if we choose to be? And that's the important thing. Social connection is on a continuum. And you'll see that statement on the lower left-hand side, pardon me, right-hand side there. Social connection is on a continuum. If we feel like we need more social connection because we're feeling anxious or alone or depressed or isolated, then are there ways in our community to seek that out, to bolster our mental health? If we want less social connection, do we have that choice, that control to be less engaged, to be more remote, more in our telework environment, and we're very productive because we're on a continuum? Because we're belonging. Humans need to belong. That is part of our basic needs. That creates opportunity for us to be healthier. How does that work? Well, social connection influences our health. The more social connected we are, we do have some hormonal change. We have some changes in our biology. Actually being socially connected based upon what we choose, not mandated, but we choose, creates these hormones that reduce stress. We get a little bit of amp up in our brain, and then it also reduces inflammation. If our social connection is just the right size, like Goldilocks in the porridge, right? Our psychology is improved when our physiology is improved, and we behave better. We aren't so argumentative. We aren't, what's that called? The quiet quitting phenomena, where you lose track of your remote worker because they aren't engaged at all. And maybe they wish they could, but now they don't know how because the anxiety, the mental health concern, and maybe their physical stress now prohibits them from being connected to you. Employers are worried about this. Employers are aware. For example, Cigna Group, another big employer, a big health insurance company, stated, Dr. Bauer stated, we found that loneliness costed employers $154 billion annually, substantially contributing to worker job withdrawal and the negative implications for organizational effectiveness and costs. Being alone, feeling lonely in the workplace is not helpful to the individual nor to the worker. I mean, not to the employer. Now, this is a report that was before the pandemic. So our mental health, the things that we struggle with, maybe in either a remote or a telework environment, are not new. What is new is that the number of us that are doing remote work, either of choice or mandate, or telework, there's more of us and more likelihood that there's going to be some negative consequences if we don't have control or choice. So what can we do? Well, here's 5 things that were published in the Washington Post as a result of the Cigna report. 5 things. And I think we could do this no matter if we are remote 100% or if we're teleworking or a hybrid tethered to an office and tethered to a computer screen. Acknowledge we're feeling lonely. Acknowledge that we feel isolated. It's a human condition. It's not a weakness. It's not a frailness. We have need to be engaged. Know when to engage and when to disengage from the online world. Take ourselves firmly in hand and try to create that control and choice. If we find ourselves actually working remote and not needing to go into an office because there is not one, then are there other ways that we can replenish our social connected, our belonging need? Well, maybe that's being a volunteer. Maybe that's finding another outlet for that organic need to be somehow connected to others. Not 24/7, if that's your choice, but somehow connected. Join a group, join a club, overcome loneliness with in-person connections of your choice. And then practice that self-care. Practice taking care of ourselves, and then with it, find somebody else who is on a common path. And then you can grow your own wellness plan, your own way to be healthy, no matter what your work environment.
Elaine, I really
Yes.
appreciate the distinction you made between loneliness and some time alone. I mean, alone time, you hear that phrase, I could use some alone time, but the difference between that and loneliness, that's really informative to me. There were some excellent comments in the chat too.
Oh, I didn't see
As
the
a young
chat.
woman, one of our participants noted, if I'm going to do a job search today, I'm not even going to look at in person. If there's not some flexibility built in, if there's not some opportunity for hybrid, I'm not even going to consider that. And that's one of the things we've heard on some previous Remote Work Wednesdays, employers saying we desperately need talent, and some have recognized that to get that talent, they need to cast a broader net. They need to be more flexible in terms of the workplace regime.
Yes. And Ron, be willing to look at a generation before they come to that workplace. I think all of us are aware, not only the Generation Z population who's now at the universities and all that, but what's called Generation Alpha. Those are the people now in junior high and high schools. And look at what their lives are like and their potential to be socially connected and belong. And they need to learn how to be socially connected, because that is a necessary part of mental health. But then as an employer, how do you accommodate those desires to a workplace? and a workplace which is in flux. Yeah. So let's wind up with, what is this social engagement, civic health, and what does that have to do with us? It has a lot. As our workplaces change and are changing, as big employers are trying to figure out how to retain that workforce, or even small employers, how to retain that workforce and how to reduce health insurance costs. Did you guys notice that a lot of the data came from health insurance surveys? So yeah, big employers of all sorts and sizes know that there's a connection with the bottom line, keeping employees healthy and keeping them well so they're productive. But if we have a lot of disenfranchisement, mental health issues, then their bottom line is at risk. Well, I hope I made somewhat of a connection with civic health. Again, the Surgeon General's report on isolation and loneliness makes this connection really well. But Kansas is one of the 14 states that have barriers to being civically engaged. And this is a recent report. This just came out in March, County Health Rankings, 2024, the National Findings Report, Creating Thriving Communities for Civic Participation. Kansas is one of the states that has barriers. We have limited access to information because we have limited broadband. Now, true, that's being improved, takes time, but we are one of the states that has been really needing to catch up with broadband. When we think about access to information, that's not only broadband, but that's local papers, newspapers that are local, that is local news. How about the library that's open and available? If libraries close, then that limits our ability to have information. How about opportunities for good health? Well, we do have frontier regions. Patsy, you know what I speak of. We do have frontier regions in the state that have limited healthcare access and limited mental health access too. How about our civic participation? Do we have a good group of volunteers? Volunteers, are we voting? Are we registered? Are there mentors? Younger people need mentors, but we all need mentors, can benefit from each other's support. And then what about Kansas joining groups? Back to that belonging, social connection. And then in order to do that, we need to think about the infrastructure. Are there places for us to meet? Are there places for us to have cultural activities, to have an identity where we can belong? Belonging takes more than just building a place, right? We have to feel like we belong, like I'm welcome, like I can attend and I'm part of the community. Even though I'm a remote worker, I never have seen you before, but I'm part of your community. So making places that are welcoming. Well, the Surgeon General's report ends with these points of how do we improve belongingness, reduce isolation and loneliness, and then improve our communities. You guys know this. You strengthen the social infrastructure. You make places where people can belong to go, especially for those workers who don't have an office, who don't have a culture of community with their job. Be more civically engaged. Encourage people to run for office or to show up for something, or invite them over to talk about the latest thing going on, create connection. Mobilize to address those health issues that stem from loneliness. In the Surgeon General's report, it unpacks diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, obesity. Those diseases and others, even arthritis, are connected to being limited, socially engaged, and can be improved by us having more social engagement, social belonging. We need to reform these digital environments. I know we all jumped into Zoom, and I realize that it's a lot more efficient, and it seems like this is a good way to spend a lunch hour. But see, I I welcome the time to meet you face to face. I crave the opportunity to drive over and see people and be in real time. So there has to be a balance if it's of choice. Now, keep in mind, there are some employees who prefer that 100% remote. Some don't, but let's look at how we use digital technology versus it using us. We need to understand our understanding of belonging and what that means and cultivate a culture of connection, not just production, but connection. So that's my stuff today. I do feel more connected to you all. And I'm going to stop my screen. And Ron, we've got about, looks like 6 minutes or so for Q&A and just chit chat.
Thank you so much, Elaine. There was a phrase in one of the URL for maybe the Surgeon General report that ended with "connect to heal." I happened to use the numeral 2. It caught my eye. Connect to heal, and that is a powerful message in a very succinct form. Right there. That's one that's gonna stay with me.
Thank you,
Other
Ron.
comments, questions?
I think Kaylee had a really wonderful perspective. Yeah, Kaylee, you're right. The pandemic really showed us a lot. Showed us a lot, and here you've started your career path, and it's, yeah, it can be complicated. And you did a shout out here about social media and social influencers and the connections. I do want to say what I didn't include today, and it wasn't relevant, but it may be of concern, is the mental health of our younger people, their use of digital media, cell phones, and what is that doing for their long-term well-being? And Ron, that's a whole nother talk. But as we model social connection, no matter where our workplace is, our young people are watching us. And our young people are watching how well we thrive and how we're managing our own anxiety and depression. So Kaylee, thank you for adding that.
Excellent. Other comments or questions?
Well, I will say, yin and yang, right? Hopefully I unpacked some serious information on the good and the bad, and also gave you a chance to connect around a really important issue, which is our own well-being and our community's well-being. So the PowerPoint slides, Ron, you'll have, the resources will be available, and I'll be available in case anyone wants to discuss after today.
Elaine, thank you so much. Huge thumbs up. I'm trying to find my reaction icon. There we are. I've got you a virtual round of applause. Thanks for a terrific message, and gosh, lots of positive comments in the chat as well. Let me just mention very quickly that our next remote work Wednesday will be on May 1. So very first of the month, a month from now. Our speaker will be Stacy Kohlmeyer, who's with the Florence Corporation. They're employing some 60 telework hybrid workers. So should be interesting to have a private sector perspective. And we invite you to join us for Remote Work Wednesday next month. Elaine's email is there in the chat again. Elaine, thanks for a terrific presentation. Thanks to all of you for joining us on Remote Work Wednesday. Have a great afternoon, a great month.